My name is Edward. I'm 71 years old, and for most of my life I worked as a construction foreman. With my own two hands, I built homes, schools, and even the very house my son lives in today. I thought that when I grew older, my family would take care of me, just as I once took care of them. But life doesn't always turn out the way you expect. 3 weeks ago, my son Mark and his wife invited me over. At first, I thought it was just another family dinner. My granddaughter had baked cookies, and the house smelled like cinnamon and coffee. But when the plates were cleared and the coffee cups put away, my son's wife, Julia, spoke words that cut deeper than any knife. "Edward," she said firmly, "we don't need you anymore. You've lived here long enough. It's time for you to go." I blinked, unsure I'd heard her correctly. My son avoided my eyes, staring down at his phone like a child caught doing something wrong. Before I could even process what was happening, 2 men came into the living room, movers. They carried out my old chair, the boxes of tools I'd kept since my working days, and even the photographs of my late wife. Everything was dumped outside like trash. I felt the world spin. My own son, my flesh and blood, was throwing away the very pieces of my life. "Dad," Mark mumbled, "it's better this way. You'll understand someday." Julia folded her arms and snapped, "Go away! We don't need you anymore." I stood there, heart pounding, but strangely calm. I realized something at that very moment. They had no idea who I really was or what I was capable of. They thought of me as an old man, weak, disposable. But behind my quiet smile was a secret that none of them knew. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply smiled, reached into my pocket, and took out my phone. I made one call. Just one. It was to a man I hadn't spoken to in nearly 20 years. He answered on the first ring. "Edward, it's been a long time." "Yes," I said calmly, "it's time." The man paused, then simply replied, "Understood." That night, I slept at a small roadside motel with nothing but a backpack and my memories. My heart was heavy, but I knew I had set something into motion. 3 days later, chaos erupted. My son and Julia were frantically calling relatives, neighbors, even the police. They were looking for me, everywhere. Why? Because I was no longer just Edward, the unwanted old man. I was Edward, the man whose name still carried weight in places they couldn't imagine. And suddenly, they realized just how big a mistake they had made. I spent that first night at a roadside motel, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly above me. The sound was steady, but my mind was racing. Memories of my late wife, my sacrifices for my son, and the betrayal I had just experienced all collided in my head. Yet beneath the pain, there was a strange calmness, because unlike Mark and Julia, I knew something they didn't. I was not a helpless old man. The call I had made was to an old friend, Samuel. Samuel and I had met decades ago, long before my son was even born. Back then, I wasn't just a construction foreman. That was only the cover. The truth was, I had once been deeply involved in something bigger, something that touched politics, finance, and even national security. For years, I lived 2 lives, the hard-working man who built houses by day and the silent problem solver who handled sensitive matters by night. When my wife fell ill, I walked away from that world. I promised her I would bury that part of my life forever. She wanted me to be just a husband, just a father.
just a simple man. And for more than 30 years, I kept that promise. But betrayal has a way of waking old ghosts. By the third day, Mark's neighbors noticed black cars with tinted windows slowly passing their house. Julia grew suspicious when she spotted two men in suits standing across the street, pretending to read newspapers. And by the fourth day, Mark himself got a phone call from someone who wouldn't even give their name. "Where is Edward?" the voice demanded. "My father? Why? What's going on?" The voice replied coldly, "Tell him we are looking everywhere." Mark hung up the phone, pale as a ghost. For the first time, he realized he had no idea who his father really was. Meanwhile, I was sitting in a small diner, sipping black coffee. Samuel slid into the booth across from me. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "You finally decided to break your silence," he said. "I didn't have a choice. They threw me out, treated me like garbage. And now they're going to learn who I really am." Samuel nodded. "The network is still active. People remember you. You think you're forgotten, but you're not. The call you made, it woke them up. Some are already moving." I leaned back, my coffee untouched. "Good. Let them look for me. Let Mark and Julia feel what it's like to lose control." For the next several days, strange things began happening around my son's home. Julia's credit card suddenly stopped working. The car she drove every day was mysteriously repossessed overnight, though she had never missed a payment. My son went to work only to be told his position had been terminated effective immediately, and when he asked why, no one could give him an answer. Panic set in. They had thought throwing me out was the end of the story, but for them, it was only the beginning. I wasn't seeking revenge out of anger. No, it was about teaching them a lesson. My whole life I had provided for Mark. I gave him shelter, food, education, and even the house he lived in. And the moment I became inconvenient, they discarded me. Now, I wanted him to understand something important. Family is not disposable. On the fifth day, Julia broke down crying in the kitchen. "Mark, what is happening to us? First your father disappears, then the money problems start. Now strangers are calling the house. What did you do?" Mark slammed his fist on the table. "It's not me. It's him. It's my father. He's behind this. I don't know how, but he is." And he was right, because every move, every shake of their world was triggered by the one phone call I had made. And I wasn't done yet. The country was looking for me, yes, but not because I was in danger. No, because when a man like me resurfaces, people in high places start paying attention. My name was not just Edward to them. It was a code, a reminder of unfinished business. And soon, the whole world would know I was back.
When I was a younger man, people called me the architect. Not because I built houses, though that was always my cover story, but because I designed solutions. Complicated problems, dangerous problems, the kind that governments didn't want their names attached to. I built networks of people, moved resources where they were needed, and erased threats before they reached the public. It was a shadow life. My wife never knew the details, and I wanted it that way. All she knew was that sometimes I had to travel for work, and when I came back, I was tired, quiet, and distant. But the truth is, I was shaping events far larger than our little town. When she got sick, I promised her I'd give it up. I swore I would bury that part of myself. For decades, I lived as just Edward,
the carpenter, the father, the grandfather. And I thought I was content. But betrayal has a way of digging up graves you thought were buried forever. By the end of the first week, my son Mark was unraveling. His phone buzzed constantly with unknown numbers. Some callers demanded money, others spoke cryptically about debts his father never paid. Julia's nerves were shattered. She wouldn't even go outside because black sedans parked across the street at all hours of the day. One evening, as I sat in another diner across town, Samuel slid me a folder across the table. "Your son is panicking. The network is watching him closely. They want to know if you intend to bring him in or leave him to drown." I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, grainy surveillance shots of Mark pacing in his yard, Julia crying into her hands, even my granddaughter clutching her backpack as she walked to school. My jaw tightened. "Leave the child out of this," I said firmly. Samuel raised an eyebrow. "That depends on you, Edward. The network doesn't forgive betrayal. They want to know where you stand." I leaned back, my chest heavy. The truth is, I had never told Mark about my past. To him, I was just a tired old man with a hammer and a toolbox. He never saw the files I burned, the passports I buried, the enemies I made. And now, he was facing the ripple effects of a world he didn't even know existed. By the 9th day, news channels began whispering about me. Not by name, of course, but in coded terms. An retired intelligence asset had resurfaced. Anonymous officials claimed an old operator had been reactivated. Even without saying my name, those who knew, knew. Meanwhile, Mark's fear turned to desperation. He reached out to old friends, asked for help, even tried contacting law enforcement. But doors kept slamming shut. His credit was destroyed, his accounts frozen, and no one wanted to be near him. Finally, one night, he cracked. He drove across the city and found me sitting on a bench outside the same diner. He looked thinner, pale, and exhausted. For a moment, I barely recognized my own son. "Dad," his voice trembled, "please, you have to stop this." I stared at him quietly. "Stop what, Mark? I haven't lifted a finger since that first phone call." Tears welled in his eyes. "Then why is this happening? Why are they after us?" I stood slowly, looking him straight in the eye. "Because you threw me away like garbage. And in doing so, you awakened something you don't understand. Actions have consequences, son. You thought you could discard your father and keep living your life unchanged. But life doesn't work that way." He shook his head. "I didn't know. I didn't know who you really were." "That's right. And you still don't." Samuel stepped out from the shadows behind me, his presence alone to make Mark stagger backward. My son realized then that his father wasn't just a man. He was a key, a doorway into a world darker and larger than he could ever imagine. And the worst part? That world had already decided it wanted me back.
Mark stood there, his shoulders shaking, eyes red. I could see fear in him, but not just fear, shame. For the first time, my son looked at me not as a frail old man, but as someone whose shadow stretched far beyond his understanding. "Dad, I don't know what you were or what you are," he whispered, his voice cracking. "But please, please make it stop. Julia's terrified. Our lives are falling apart. I'll do anything." I studied him carefully. Part of me wanted to reach out, to comfort him like I did when he was a boy. But another part, the part that had been hardened by betrayal, held me back. "Anything?" I asked coldly. He nodded. "Yes, anything." I motioned for him to sit down on the bench. Samuel remained standing behind us, arms crossed like a sentry. "You don't understand, Mark. The moment you threw me out, you exposed yourself.
The network doesn't forgive weakness. They see you as leverage now. If they think I care about you, they'll use you. If they think I don't, they'll destroy you just to send me a message. Mark buried his face in his hands. I didn't know, Dad. I swear I didn't know. That's the problem, I said quietly. You never cared to know. You judged me as a burden without realizing who I really was. For a long moment, silence hung between us, broken only by the hum of streetlights. Then Samuel spoke. They want you back, Edward. The network believes you still have value. Old enemies are resurfacing. Names we thought were gone have reappeared, and they know you're alive. Mark looked up, horrified. Enemies? What enemies? I sighed. Memories I had buried for decades began to stir. There was one name that still haunted me, Viktor Malenkov, a Russian financier who built empires on blood money. Years ago, I dismantled his operation piece by piece. He swore vengeance, but then he disappeared. Now, it seemed, he was back. Malenkov, I muttered under my breath. Samuel nodded grimly. We intercepted chatter. He's building something again, dangerous. The network wants you to finish what you started. Mark's face drained of color. You mean they want you to go after this guy at your age? I looked at him sharply. Age doesn't matter when you've spent your life preparing for moments like this. I know Malenkov. I know his patterns. And if he's back, he's not just after me. He'll come after anyone connected to me, including you. Mark's hands trembled. So, what do we do? There it was. For the first time, my son wasn't dismissing me, wasn't mocking me, wasn't trying to erase me from his life. He was asking for guidance, asking for protection. I leaned closer, my voice low and steady. You listen to me. You follow my rules. No arguments, no complaints. Because the world you've stepped into doesn't forgive mistakes. You thought I was a burden. Now you'll see I'm the only shield you've got left. Samuel placed a small black phone on the bench between us. The network is waiting for your decision, Edward. If you agree, they'll activate resources. But once you step back in, there's no walking away again. I picked up the phone, feeling its weight. A simple object, yet holding the power to change everything. Mark swallowed hard. Dad, are you really going to do this? I looked him straight in the eye. You wanted me gone. Now the world wants me back. And if I don't answer, we're all finished. For the first time in his life, Mark didn't see me just as his father. He saw me as what I had always been hiding, a man who could shake the foundations of power. I pressed one button on the phone, and with that, the past I thought I had buried forever came rushing back.
The phone in my hand felt heavier than stone. One button press, and I knew the quiet life I had built over 30 years would be gone forever. But sometimes, life doesn't give you choices. It gives you ultimatums. I pressed the button. A robotic female voice answered instantly. Edward, authorization required. I spoke a sequence of numbers I hadn't said out loud in decades. Numbers burned into my memory like scars. After a pause, the voice replied, Authorization confirmed. Welcome back, architect. Mark flinched at the word, his eyes darting to me. Architect? What does that mean? But before I could answer, Samuel leaned in. It means your father just re-entered a world you cannot even imagine. Within hours, things began moving. At midnight, Samuel drove me and Mark to a private airstrip outside the city. Waiting there was a sleek black jet, guarded by men in suits with no insignias, no names. They saluted me as I stepped out of the car. Welcome back, sir, one of them said. Mark stared wide-eyed. Dad, who are you? I didn't respond. Not yet.
Inside the jet, screens lit up with maps, dossiers, and encrypted messages. Faces appeared, some familiar, others new. Old operatives I thought were long retired greeted me with nods. The network was alive, stronger than I had expected. "Edward," a voice came through the comms. "We've confirmed it. Viktor Malenkov is back. He's consolidating his power in Eastern Europe. Arms, data, financial pipelines, you name it. He's rebuilding it. If he succeeds, governments will fall." I clenched my fists. I should have finished him decades ago. Samuel placed a file in front of me. Inside were photos of Malenkov today. Older, yes, but not weaker. His eyes still burned with the same ruthless hunger for control. "He knows you're alive, and he's already looking for you. That makes this personal, for both of you." Mark sat in stunned silence, watching as layers of my life peeled back before his eyes. For him, it was like discovering his father was a stranger. Finally, he spoke. "So, what now? You just go after him?" I turned to him. "This isn't a simple hunt, Mark. Malenkov isn't some thug. He's a strategist, a monster who hides behind money and influence. To reach him, I need to dismantle his empire piece by piece. And that starts with information." The jet touched down in Switzerland by dawn. We were met by another contact, Elena, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, once one of my best operatives. She embraced me like no time had passed. "Architect," she said softly, "we've missed you." "Elena," I nodded, "bring me up to speed." She guided us into a secure facility hidden beneath a luxury hotel. On the walls were screens displaying coded bank transfers, satellite images, and intercepted calls. Malenkov's network was sprawling, but not invisible. "His weakness is trust," Elena explained. "He relies on a small circle of men to keep his empire running. If we crack one of them, the rest will crumble." I studied the names. One stood out, Ivan Petrov. Malenkov's financial handler, ruthless but greedy. Greed always left cracks. "That's our first step," I said firmly. Mark looked uneasy. "And what happens when you find him?" I met his gaze. "Then, son, you'll see why they called me the architect." That night, as Mark tried to sleep in the cold metal quarters of the facility, I sat alone, staring at Malenkov's picture. The years had changed us both, but one thing hadn't changed: the war between us. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about finishing what I started. And this time, there would be no mistakes.
Switzerland. Cold air, sharp winds, and a city that glittered with quiet wealth. Beneath the polished streets, however, corruption thrived. And at the heart of it was Ivan Petrov, the man who handled Malenkov's dirty money. Petrov was careful, paranoid even. He lived in a penthouse with private security, changed his cars every week, and never used the same phone twice. But everyone has habits, and habits, no matter how small, can be exploited. Elena placed a file on the steel table. Every Thursday, Petrov visits a private art gallery. He spends hours staring at paintings, particularly one, a Russian landscape. He thinks no one notices, but we do. I smiled faintly. Everyone has a weakness. For him, it's sentiment. Mark leaned forward. "So what's the plan? Just walk in and grab him?" I shook my head. "If we scare him, he'll vanish. Petrov is valuable alive. We need information, bank codes, accounts, communication channels. If we get him talking, Malenkov's empire begins to collapse." Mark frowned. "And if he doesn't talk?" I met his eyes, my voice steady. "He will." That Thursday, the operation began. Samuel, Elena, and I dressed as wealthy patrons, blending into the marble halls. Mark came too, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit. His nervousness showed, but I let him come because he needed to see the truth with his own eyes. The gallery was quiet, filled with whispers and the soft sound of classical music. Petrov stood in front of the painting, just as expected. His guards lingered nearby, scanning the room. Elena whispered in my earpiece, "Target in position. Your move, architect." I walked toward Petrov, slow and casual, as if I were just another admirer of art. Mark trailed behind, pretending to examine sculptures. "Beautiful piece, isn't it?" I said to Petrov, standing beside him. He glanced at me annoyed, then back at the painting. "It reminds me of home." I studied him carefully. A man who thrived on money and power, yet secretly longed for a past he could never return to. Home is never as far away as you think. His eyes flickered. For a split second, recognition flashed across his face. He knew my voice. He knew who I was. "Edward," he whispered. Before his guards could react, Samuel intercepted them with a staged distraction, a spilled glass of wine, an angry outburst. Elena slipped a small device into Petrov's pocket, cutting off his outgoing signals. I leaned closer. "You can walk out of here quietly with me, or you can watch your empire burn while Malenkov leaves you behind. Your choice." Petrov's jaw clenched. "You shouldn't have come back." I smiled, and yet, here I am. Within minutes, we had him in a black car, blindfolded and restrained. Mark sat across from him, wide-eyed, unable to believe what was happening. "Dad, you just kidnapped him. In daylight." I shook my head. "No, son. I extracted him. There's a difference." Back at the facility, Petrov was seated in a dimly lit room, a single lamp casting harsh shadows. He was stubborn at first, refusing to speak. But men like Petrov always break, not through violence, through fear of irrelevance. I laid out photos of Malenkov's new allies, intercepted transactions, and coded messages we already had. Slowly, his confidence cracked. You don't know what you're dealing with," he muttered. "Malenkov has built something bigger than before. Global reach, politicians, bankers, soldiers, they all serve him." I leaned closer, my voice calm but firm. "And yet, here you are, in my chair, alone, powerless." Petrov's jaw clenched. Finally, he spoke the words we had been waiting for. "There's a meeting in Prague, 2 weeks from now. Malenkov will be there. If you want him, that's your chance." Samuel and Elena exchanged glances. This was the lead we needed. Mark, sitting in the corner, finally spoke. "Dad, is this really who you are? This world? These people?" I turned to him. "This is the world I left behind so you could grow up safe. And now, because of your choices, I've been dragged back into it. But listen carefully, Mark. This time, you're going to see it through. You're going to stand beside me, and maybe then you'll finally understand who your father really is." Mark didn't reply, but in his eyes, I saw something new. Not just fear, respect. The architect was back, and Prague would be the next battlefield. 2 weeks. That was all the time we had before Prague. 2 weeks to prepare for a meeting that could either end Malenkov's empire or end our lives. Back at the Swiss facility, the network moved like a machine. Screens glowed with satellite feeds. Analysts whispered over encrypted calls, and operatives checked weapons and gear. But in the middle of all that chaos, my attention was on only one thing: Mark. He was sitting at a metal desk, staring at a pistol laid in front of him as though it were a snake ready to strike. "I don't belong here," he muttered. I stepped into the room quietly. Neither did I once. But life doesn't care where you belong, Mark. It only cares whether you adapt. He looked up, frustration in his eyes.
I'm not you. I'm not some shadow operative. I'm just a man who works 9 to 5, who thought his biggest problem was paying bills. And now? Now I'm part of this? I sat across from him, my voice calm. You're part of this because you chose to throw me out. Actions have consequences. And now, those consequences have dragged you into my world. You don't have to like it, but if you want to survive, you'll listen. I slid the pistol closer to him. Pick it up. Mark hesitated, then finally lifted it. His hands shook. First rule, I said firmly, control your breathing. The gun is not your enemy. Panic is. For the next hour, I trained him. Not just in handling a weapon, but in situational awareness, observation, and discipline. Elena joined us, teaching him basic surveillance, how to notice when he was being followed, how to blend into a crowd. Samuel drilled him on physical endurance, pushing him to run, spar, and fight, even when he was exhausted. At first, Mark resisted. He complained, stumbled, cursed under his breath. But slowly I saw something shift. The weakness began to chip away. The fear began to turn into focus. One night, after training, he sat beside me in the dim light of the facility. Dad, were you always like this? Strong? Unshakable? I shook my head. No, I was just like you once. Ordinary. But when the world tests you, you either break or you become steel. He was silent for a long time, then whispered, I don't want to break. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Then you won't. Meanwhile, intelligence on Prague grew clearer. Petrov had confirmed the meeting would take place in an underground wine cellar beneath a centuries-old castle. Malenkov would be surrounded by his inner circle, politicians, bankers, and mercenaries. Security would be tight, nearly impenetrable. Nearly, I repeated to myself. Elena pointed to the schematics on the screen. There's one access tunnel, old, forgotten. It connects to the castle's storage rooms. If we move fast and quiet, we can get in before the meeting starts. Samuel added, but if Malenkov spots you, it's over. He'll vanish again. We need him alive, Edward. Dead, he becomes a martyr. Alive, he's leverage. I nodded. Then alive he will be. The night before our departure, Mark came to me again. His suit fit better now, his steps firmer, his eyes sharper. Still not an operative, not yet, but no longer the fragile men I had seen 2 weeks earlier. Dad, why didn't you ever tell me about who you really were? I sighed. Because I wanted you to have what I never did. A normal life. I didn't want you haunted by shadows, by enemies, by blood on your hands. I thought I could bury it all. But the truth is, the past always finds a way back. He looked at me steadily. Then maybe it's time I stop running from it. Maybe it's time I learn. For the first time, I smiled. A genuine smile. Then tomorrow, you'll see what it really means to walk in the dark. As the plane to Prague roared to life, I stood at the hatch, staring into the night sky. Somewhere out there, Malenkov was waiting, surrounded by his empire. But he didn't know I was coming, and he didn't know that this time, I wasn't coming alone. The flight to Prague was silent, tense. Mark sat across from me, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the floor. He wasn't the same man from weeks ago. He had hardened, sharpened. But I could see it in him still. Fear. Fear of the unknown. Fear of failing. I leaned toward him. Mark, fear isn't weakness. It's fuel. You ride it, or it rides you. Tonight, you prove which one it will be.
He nodded, just once. The castle rose above the Czech hills like a ghost of centuries past. Its towers loomed under a pale moon, its stone walls weathered but strong. Beneath it, through the forest, we found the old tunnel Elena had mapped. The air inside was damp and cold. Each step echoed. Mark's breathing was steady now, controlled. I could feel his focus. At the end of the tunnel, Samuel disabled a rusted grate, and we slipped into the storage rooms. Above us, muffled voices drifted down, dozens of men gathering, laughter, clinking glasses. Malenkov's empire, celebrating in the dark. We moved like shadows, up narrow staircases, through stone corridors, until finally, through a crack in an ancient door, I saw him. Malenkov. Older now, scarred, but still radiating that same venomous power. Around him sat politicians, crime lords, and arms dealers, every piece of the web he had spun. Elena whispered, "Too many! You can't take them all!" She was right. But we didn't need them all. We needed only one. The plan unfolded quickly. Samuel cut the power, total darkness. Screams filled the hall. In the chaos, I rushed forward, dragging Malenkov from his chair, pressing my blade to his throat. "Hello, old friend," I hissed in his ear. The emergency lights flickered back on, red and dim. The room froze. Every man there saw what I held, the devil himself, captured. Mark burst in then, covering me with steady aim. His voice rang strong. "Nobody moves." For the first time I saw it. Strength in him. He wasn't the weak man they'd mocked, the son who'd thrown his father away. He was steel. We dragged Malenkov through the tunnels, his men too stunned to act fast enough. Helicopter blades thundered outside, our extraction waiting. But Malenkov laughed, even with a knife at his throat. "Edward, you think this ends with me? You've only cut one head from the beast. There will be another. There will always be another." I leaned close. "Then I'll be waiting." As the helicopter lifted into the night sky, Prague shrinking below us, I finally exhaled. For years I had carried this weight. Betrayal, exile, enemies in the dark. But tonight we had done the impossible. I looked at Mark. His hands no longer shook. His gaze no longer wavered. He had stepped into the fire, and he had not broken. "Dad," he said quietly over the roar of the blades, "what happens now?" I smiled faintly. Now we go home. Together. For the first time in years, I felt it. Peace. Not because the fight was over, but because at last I wasn't fighting alone. The end.